Wisdom teeth. Look at your jawline in the mirror. You think it defines your face, giving you structure, symmetry, and strength. What you do not realize is that the bone beneath your skin is actively collapsing. Your jaw is shrinking, a rapid, ruthless structural downgrade occurring faster than your genetic code can adapt. For millions of years, your ancestors survived by tearing raw, fibrous meat, crushing dense roots, and grinding uncooked vegetation. This brutal diet required a massive, heavily muscled mandible, anchored by thick bone, capable of generating immense mechanical force. But then you learned to harness fire. You began cooking your food, rendering it soft, easily chewable, and essentially pre-digested by heat. And as agriculture took over the planet just 10,000 years ago, your diet shifted dramatically to processed grains, boiled starches, and tenderized meats. The intense evolutionary mandate for a massive, heavy jaw vanished overnight on a geological timescale. Without the constant mechanical stress of chewing raw, tough food, the bone began to rapidly recede, generation after generation. But your DNA did not get the full message. Your genetic blueprint still stubbornly demands the production of 32 teeth, perfectly spaced for an elongated primate jaw that no longer exists on your face. You are carrying biological hardware meant for a skull you simply do not possess. As your wisdom teeth, those final 4 massive molars, attempt to erupt in your late teens or early 20s, they find absolutely no room left on the assembly line. They become physically trapped beneath your gums, completely impacted against the dense, unyielding bone of your shrunken jaw. They push aggressively forward, violently colliding with the delicate roots of your healthy adjacent teeth. This creates excruciating pressure, chronic bacterial infections, and the physical destruction of your jawbone from the inside out. You are born with biological shrapnel embedded deep in your skull, vestigial remnants, that offer zero evolutionary benefit, but carry a massive risk of lethal sepsis if left unchecked. Your mouth is an active war zone between an ancient, outdated genetic instruction and your modern, compromised anatomy. It proves that your evolution is not a seamless, beautiful march toward perfection, but a messy, lagging, and incredibly painful compromise. Appendix. Run your hand down to the lower right quadrant of your abdomen and press firmly against your skin. Buried deep within your intestinal tract lies a shriveled, worm-like tube of tissue, quietly ticking away in the darkness. You know it only as a biological time bomb, waiting to violently rupture and flood your internal organs with lethal bacteria. But it was not always a terrifying liability. Millions of years ago, when your early primate ancestors lived exclusively on tough, fibrous plant matter, thick tree bark, and raw toxic leaves, this tiny dead-end tube was a massive, highly efficient fermentation chamber known as the cecum. If you look at the internal anatomy of modern herbivores, like koalas or rabbits, their cecum completely dominates their digestive tract, acting as a colossal biological reactor that breaks down complex cellulose that would otherwise be utterly indigestible. But your diet drastically changed. You became an apex predator, eating high-energy meat, and eventually you learned to cook your meals, breaking down the tough cellular walls of plants before they ever entered your mouth. The massive, energy-draining fermentation vat was no longer required for your survival, so your body aggressively downsized it. Century after century, it atrophied, shrinking relentlessly until nothing remained but a scarred, narrow corridor barely the width of a pencil. Now it serves almost no primary digestive function, yet it remains dangerously open to the rest of your intestines. When calcified pieces of feces, undigested seeds, or parasitic infections block that incredibly narrow opening, the trapped bacteria inside the appendix multiply at a terrifying, exponential rate. The internal pressure skyrockets, the fragile tissue necrotizes from a sudden lack of blood flow, and the muscular walls begin to tear apart. Without warning, it bursts, unleashing massive amounts of toxic pus and sepsis directly into your abdominal cavity. A piece of anatomy that once guaranteed your ancient ancestors' survival through harsh, starving winters has devolved into a useless, volatile organ that can execute you without a single moment's notice. You are walking around right now with a deactivated piece of evolutionary machinery that completely forgot how to function, yet retained its absolute, uncompromising ability to kill you. Tailbone. Reach behind you and press firmly at the very base of your spine, right where your back meets your pelvis. You will feel a hard, sharply curved cluster of fused vertebrae jutting inward beneath your skin. You casually call it a tailbone, but it is precisely what the medical name implies. It is a tail. 20 million years ago, before your ancestors descended from the high forest canopy to walk upright on the treacherous African savanna. A long, highly muscular tail was absolutely vital for maintaining perfect balance and gripping branches in midair. As you transitioned to entirely bipedal movement, forcing your spine into a vertical column, that heavy tail suddenly became a massive biomechanical hindrance, constantly throwing off your center of gravity. Over countless generations, evolution violently stripped the tail away, fusing the remaining useless vertebrae together into the rigid, uncomfortable block of bone you sit on today, known as the coccyx. But the genetic code for growing a long, prehensile tail was never permanently deleted from your DNA. It was simply silenced, covered up by a fragile regulatory switch that is supposed to flip off during your early embryonic development. For the first 4 weeks of your life inside the womb, you actually possessed a highly visible, prominent tail, looking exactly like the embryo of a reptile or a dog. Normally, your cells are strictly programmed to systematically dissolve that structure before you are born. But occasionally, that critical genetic switch completely fails to activate. The ancient, dormant code suddenly wakes up, and human babies are brought into this world with fully formed, fleshy tails protruding directly from their lower backs. These are not mere lumps of skin or cosmetic deformities. They contain active blood vessels, functioning muscles, and dense nerve networks, allowing the tail to twitch, flex, and move entirely on its own. It is a chilling, undeniable physical manifestation of your deep evolutionary past, requiring immediate surgical amputation to hide the disturbing truth. You are not a perfectly designed, standalone species constructed from scratch. You are a hastily modified primate, carrying the exact blueprints to grow the same appendages as a macaque, just waiting for a single microscopic genetic glitch to expose the animal hiding right beneath your skin. Darwin's tubercle. Run your index finger very slowly along the outer cartilaginous rim of your upper ear. Right where the edge begins to curve sharply inward, you might feel a small, hard, extremely distinct nodule jutting out just beneath the thin skin. Roughly 10% of the entire human population carries this exact anatomical anomaly on one or both ears. But it is not a random birth defect or a benign cyst. It is an evolutionary tombstone. Charles Darwin meticulously documented this precise structure in The Descent of Man, definitively identifying it as a crucial vestigial feature that proves your undeniable, deep-rooted mammalian ancestry. Millions of years ago, your primate ancestors needed hyperacute, omnidirectional hearing just to survive in dense, predatory jungle environments. To achieve this, their ears possessed a highly complex, articulated joint right at the exact location of that tiny bump. This structural pivot allowed them to rapidly swivel, twitch, and completely flatten their ears against their skulls to pinpoint the precise location of a snapping twig or a silently stalking predator in the brush. But as your species eventually moved out into the open plains and began relying almost exclusively on binocular vision and group communication, the absolute necessity for independent, radar-like hearing began to rapidly fade. The intricate network of muscles and joints that once articulated your ears became an expensive, unnecessary waste of metabolic energy. So, evolution forcefully decommissioned the entire system. The joint fused completely solid. The surrounding muscles severely atrophied into useless strips of paralyzed tissue, and the ear itself locked firmly into a fixed, forward-facing position against the side of your head. That tiny, hard nodule you feel on your ear today is the calcified grave of that ancient, hypermobile joint. You are carrying around a permanently frozen piece of biological hardware that your body intentionally disabled eons ago. You cannot move it, you cannot use it to enhance your hearing, yet the detailed blueprint for it stubbornly remains locked in your genetic code. Every single time you touch that rigid bump, you are physically interacting with the exact spot where your evolution simply gave up halfway, leaving behind a ruined, paralyzed anatomical mechanism that will never, ever function again. Palmaris muscle. Rest your bare forearm flat on a table. Turn your palm facing up toward the ceiling, and tightly pinch your thumb and pinky finger together while slightly tilting your hand back toward your face. For most of you, a thick, highly visible tendon will instantly pop up, running straight down the exact center of your inner wrist, straining against the skin. That tense, rigid cord of tissue is the palmaris longus. It is a dense, powerful muscle designed for one highly specific, brutal physiological task, supporting the entire weight of your body as you violently hang, swing, and brace it through the highest branches of a dense forest canopy. Millions of years ago, your daily survival depended entirely on your absolute, unbreakable grip strength while suspended midair. This specific tendon rigidly locked your wrist and forearm together, preventing your muscles from tearing apart under the massive kinetic strain of hurling yourself from tree to tree. But you do not live in the canopy anymore. You walk upright on the ground. You have not needed to aggressively swing from a branch to escape a predator in millions of years. As a direct result, this once critical piece of survival anatomy has been entirely rendered obsolete, and evolution is currently in the active, relentless process of deleting it from your species forever. In fact, right now, 14% of the entire human population has already evolved completely past it. If you just performed that test and saw a perfectly flat, hollow wrist with absolutely no tendon popping up, you are part of that advanced genetic minority. You lack the muscle entirely, yet extensive clinical testing proves you suffer absolutely zero loss in hand strength, fine motor dexterity, or crushing grip. The palmaris longus does absolutely nothing for you. It is such a profoundly useless, deactivated piece of tissue that modern trauma surgeons routinely harvest it from the wrists of patients, cutting it out entirely to use as raw biological spare parts for complex reconstructive surgeries in other, more important areas of the body. You are walking around right now carrying useless, dead weight inside your forearms, an obsolete primate anchor cable that your species is actively and systematically trying to erase from existence. Goosebumps. Notice exactly what happens to your skin when a freezing gust of wind suddenly hits your bare arms, or when you hear a disturbing sound in the dark that instantly triggers your deep, primal fight-or-flight response. Your skin tightens rapidly, and thousands of tiny, elevated bumps aggressively erupt across your flesh. You casually call them goosebumps, but what you are actually experiencing is a massive systemic misfire known as the pilomotor reflex. Deep beneath the surface of your skin, violently attached to the very base of every single microscopic hair follicle, are tiny, involuntary muscles called the erector pili. When your sympathetic nervous system is suddenly flooded with a massive surge of adrenaline from extreme cold or sheer terror, these tiny muscles violently contract in perfect unison, forcefully pulling the follicle straight upright. In a heavily furred animal, like a chimpanzee, a wolf, or a cornered cat, this exact physiological reaction is a brilliant, highly effective survival mechanism. It instantly puffs up their thick coat, either trapping a dense layer of insulating air tightly against the skin to prevent them from freezing to death, or dramatically increasing their visual profile to make them look massively intimidating to an approaching predator. But you do not have fur. You lost your thick, insulating coat of protective hair millions of years ago in exchange for highly efficient sweat glands to regulate your core temperature on the scorching African savanna. Yet your deeply primitive nervous system never adapted to your total nakedness. When you are terrified or freezing, your brain still blindly fires the exact same ancient emergency signal, forcefully contracting millions of microscopic muscles in a desperate attempt to puff up a thick coat of fur that simply no longer exists on your body. It accomplishes absolutely nothing. It provides zero thermal insulation against the cold, and it certainly does not make you look larger or more threatening to an attacker. It is a completely useless, ghostly echo of your deeply ingrained animal instincts. You are experiencing a system-wide physiological glitch. Your nervous system is desperately pulling the biological levers to deploy a heavy defensive shield that evolution stripped away from you eons ago, leaving you shivering, naked, and undeniably vulnerable. Hiccups. Feel that sudden, violently uncontrollable spasm tear through your chest, when you drink ice water too fast or swallow a dangerously large bite of food. Your breath is forcefully halted, your throat instantly locks shut, and your entire torso jerks with a sharp, involuntary, and deeply uncomfortable gasp. You are experiencing a hiccup, a universally annoying physiological reflex that serves absolutely zero functional purpose in the modern human body. There is no evolutionary advantage whatsoever to suddenly and violently convulsing your diaphragm. But if you carefully trace the exact neurological wiring of this spasm backward through the deep fossil record, you will uncover a truly unsettling truth. As evolutionary biologist Neil Shubin meticulously detailed in his forensic research Your Inner Fish, the hiccup is not a human reflex at all. It is a severe, hardwired genetic glitch directly left over from your ancient, water-dwelling amphibian ancestors. Hundreds of millions of years ago, long before your genetic lineage ever dragged itself out of the mud and crawled onto dry land, you existed as an entirely aquatic creature. And if you look closely at modern amphibians, specifically tadpoles, they utilize an identical, perfectly choreographed neurological reflex simply to survive. When a tadpole breathes underwater, it violently spasms its breathing muscles to quickly pump oxygen-rich water over its gills, while simultaneously snapping its glottis completely shut to prevent that exact same water from drowning its rapidly developing lungs. The highly specific neurological wiring required to execute this complex aquatic maneuver, the vagus and phrenic nerves, runs directly from the brainstem, down the neck, and into the chest. But because your mammalian neck eventually evolved to be significantly longer, and your chest cavity vastly expanded to accommodate massive lungs, those ancient nerves now have to travel a ridiculously long, highly convoluted, and vulnerable path through your modern anatomy. When these elongated nerves become slightly irritated by a suddenly expanded stomach or a rapid change in temperature, they instantly short-circuit. They blindly fire the ancient, deeply buried genetic code, forcefully compelling your modern diaphragm to spasm and your throat to aggressively snap shut, desperately trying to pump water over gills you simply no longer possess. Every single time you hiccup, you are physically experiencing the undeniable ghost of an amphibian reflex, a 300-million-year-old software bug violently executing inside your mammalian hardware. Ear muscles. Stand completely still in a quiet room and wait for an unexpected, sharp sound, a door slamming, a glass shattering, or a dog barking in the distance. The very millisecond that sound hits you, your brain instantly fires a massive electrical signal to a cluster of muscles wrapped tightly around the base of your ears. These are the auricular muscles. If you were a deer, a cat, or an early primate, this exact electrical impulse would cause your entire ear to rapidly snap to attention, pivoting like a highly calibrated radar dish to lock onto the precise origin of the noise. It is an incredibly sophisticated biological targeting system, designed to detect a predator before it strikes. But you are human. When that same electrical command is issued, absolutely nothing happens. Your ears remain completely motionless, locked firmly against the sides of your skull. But the signal is still being sent. Clinical electromyography, or EMG readings, perfectly capture the grim reality of this evolutionary failure. When electrodes are attached to the skin around your ears and a sudden noise is played, the monitors immediately spike. The auricular muscles violently twitch and spasm under your skin, desperately straining to pivot an ear that is simply too heavy, and a joint that has been permanently fused shut. Your brain is aggressively slamming its foot down on the gas pedal, but the biological transmission has been completely ripped out. You still possess the ancient neurological wiring and the actual muscular hardware to physically aim your ears at danger. But evolution severely degraded the muscles over millions of years until they became pathetically weak. You are carrying around a deactivated surveillance system. Your body knows exactly what to do. It sends the exact right emergency commands, but it no longer has the mechanical strength to execute them. You are left completely blind to the acoustic environment around you, forced to clumsily turn your entire head just to locate the source of a sound, blissfully unaware that your ear muscles are furiously twitching in the dark, trying to do a job they lost the ability to perform eons ago. Aphotic sneeze. Walk out of a dark, dimly lit building and step directly into the blinding, unfiltered glare of the midday sun. Before your eyes even have the necessary time to properly dilate, you suddenly inhale sharply, your chest violently heaves, and you forcefully expel a massive, uncontrollable sneeze. It seems completely harmless, a quirky, minor physiological inconvenience that you casually dismiss without a second thought. But you are not just sneezing at the sun. You are actively experiencing a massive, literal short circuit deep inside your brainstem. This is a clinically documented neurological defect, formerly known as the autosomal dominant compelling helio-ophthalmic outburst, or ACHO syndrome, and it currently affects up to 35% of the entire human population. To understand exactly why this happens, you have to look very closely at the messy, incredibly crowded architecture of your cranial nerves. When that intense, blinding sunlight violently hits your retinas, your optic nerve instantly fires a massive electrical warning signal back to your brain, desperately commanding your pupils to aggressively constrict and protect your vision. But your cranial cavity is not a cleanly designed, perfectly insulated machine. The optic nerve runs directly alongside the trigeminal nerve, the massive biological cable exclusively responsible for sensing physical irritation in your face and nasal passages. Because evolution did not properly shield or separate these biological wires, they constantly leak. When the optic nerve fires that massive electrical signal triggered by the sudden bright light, the electricity literally jumps the gap. It violently arcs over into the adjacent trigeminal nerve, causing a massive, system-wide crosswire glitch. Your brain suddenly receives a frantic, completely false signal that there is a severe physical irritant trapped deep inside your nose, and it instantly triggers a violent respiratory reflex to expel it. You are sneezing at pure photons. Your incredibly complex, supposedly highly evolved brain simply cannot tell the difference between a sudden burst of harmless sunlight and a physical piece of dangerous dust. It is a chilling, undeniable reminder that you are not a flawlessly engineered creation. Your internal wiring is deeply compromised, hastily patched together with biological compromises and completely uninsulated cables. If a simple flash of sunlight can completely hijack your respiratory system through a basic, uninsulated neurological glitch, just imagine what else your brain is quietly doing without your permission. The physical flaws buried inside your anatomy are only the very beginning. Right now, there is an entire hidden architecture of invisible, subconscious rules completely dictating every single choice you make, from exactly who you blindly trust to what you irrationally fear. You genuinely think you are in absolute control of your life, but your mind is running on an ancient, deeply flawed operating system that you do not even have the admin password for. If you want to see the exact psychological mechanisms currently manipulating your daily behavior and warping your reality, click the video on your screen right now, or hit the link down in the description. It is time to finally find out who is really driving the machine.